Welcome back. Um, okay, so just to recap, um, basically, a couple of days ago, we started this simple. Uh, let's open the README. It's a simple gem which allows you to compose service objects and call them um, in a simple way. uh, Okay, so essentially the reason why I'm working on this project is I've got some legacy code that's using services a lot like this, right? It's quite complicated, and basically there's this episode of Ruby Tapas, rubytapas.com. I think it's episode 11. Um, Basically, if you haven't watched it before, you should. Basically, it's just saying like command query separation. Um, so the big problem here is that you're calling a service object, and it's going to have side effects, uh, but you're also expecting it to return a result. It makes testing quite difficult, and it's sort of a violation of the command query separation principle. So instead, what we want to do is slowly migrate our old service objects in this sort of app over to this new way of doing things where you inject behavior into it instead of relying on the return value. And so it ends up looking a bit like this, a bit like a monad. Um, so what we want to do is we want to support the legacy code and the legacy way of doing things. So the result will, for now, be returned. But we want to also at the same time allow a block to be passed to our service objects where we define success and failure behavior like this. So that's what we're building right now. We've got most of the gem done. Um, and it's just so we've got this like the base class done, we've got a matcher done, and the success failure is working. The final piece of the puzzle is just to add these like failure, like multiple failure conditions. So you can see that our acceptance test here is failing. Um, so the whole idea is, yeah, if you pass a symbol or a string or whatever here, um, if the service fails and it matches this argument, whatever it is, I don't think it's really important what sort of object it is, whether it just if it matches, then the failure code will run, and then you've got like a generic failure catch-all. I think perhaps the final step of this is to do some sort of validation in that making sure that, for instance, if you define failure codes here and you don't define a generic failure block and a failure does occur that's not handled, then we want to raise some sort of error, I suppose. But let's go to the acceptance test and see where we should be starting. So this is my acceptance test here in RSpec. So I'm including acceptance helpers, which for now is just the step method, which I use in other projects as a pattern. I don't like Capybara or Cucumber, but I still like to do sort of feature tests step by step. So I might actually do. Yep. So that's not important. Then I define like a dummy class here called myService. I include our base service that we're building. I initialize it with 2 parameters, and then I have a perform method, which just does like arbitrary stuff. So like, if you don't give it the first parameter, it's going to it's going to fail on a param1 error. If you don't give it a second parameter, it's going to fail on a param2 error. Otherwise, if you don't give either, it's going to do a failure without a code, so it's just going to be a generic failure. And if you supply param1 and 2, you're going to get the success. So with this simple dummy class, this is basically how we want our client code to use our gem, right? So when you're writing your own code and you use this gem, this is what I expect your service to look like. So with this dummy class, we can make some assertions, right? So the first acceptance test is that we specified that the service returns values. So this is just the legacy behavior. So if I initialize my service and I call it, I expect the result to be the success, right? If I initialize it with an error, then I expect the result to be the failure result, right? Now this usage is not recommended, but it's required for legacy compatibility. So then the next acceptance test here is like using the service with a simple block. So if I create my service and then I call the service and give it a block, I expect that block to be evaluated, and I want that on result to be available to me. So that means that I can use this like very simply. I don't need to, if I'm writing a service that I'm confident will probably never fail, I don't want to clutter my code up with a whole lot of verbose on success, on failure. I'm perhaps interested in the success case most of the time, and so I don't really need. I want to have the shorthand on available to me. So that makes that assertion, and I pass in a double into this block, and I assert that it's been called. The update is called with the correct argument, right? And then here, if I use the syntax and the failure case occurs, I expect an exception. I could, I suppose, I mean, I could ask the client to query this matcher and say like .success here, but I think that raising an exception is a little bit more explicit, because if you do want to handle failure, you shouldn't be using this syntax. That's my thinking anyway. Okay, so the next acceptance test is using the service with complex result matches. So that's the preferred way of doing things. Once again, I create a double, and I expect that it receives this message. So when I call the success. So the on here is actually what I'm calling a matcher, and when I call the success method on the matcher and pass in the block, that's the block that I intend to be run. We make some assertions on the failure cases, and finally, so if I say on failure, I don't need to define a success, right? And because perhaps my service has side effects and I don't really care I'm not going to have any logic that occurs on success. I'm only interested in the failures, so we're just asserting that the failure blocks aren't called when the service, runs successfully. Finally, we're doing the param error thing here, and just making sure that try to remember how is this working. I initialize my service to fail with code param to error. Yep, so I'm creating a service that's meant to fail because it's missing the parameter. So I just got some notifications. Ooh, Reddit. Wonder if anyone's watching. I thought it was a reply to my post here, but actually it was another Reddit comment I made. Okay, so let's go. So I think this is the failing thing here. So if I set up my service to fail, I don't expect my double to receive the update, right? So I don't expect this to run when there's a failure, and I expect the failure to run. Okay. Okay, so that's all. Okay, that's all working. And now this is the final acceptance spec. That the one that's actually failing. So if I create a service that's meant to fail, and I provide a generic failure and a specific failure, I expect only the specific failure code to run, and that's failing. So now we know where we are. Sorry, I'm going over this because I haven't looked at this code for a few days. So let's look at the actual base service. So when you call it, it performs and it returns a result. If you give it a block, it creates a matcher, it yields the matcher, and it raises a failure unless the service was success or the failure was handled. That's quite self-explanatory. I think that reads rather nicely. Then from within the child who inherits from the service, they'll call success with a result, and failure with a result, or an optional code. So I think the first thing here is that we need a way to remember the failure code. Right now we're not storing it anywhere. I think what I want to do, wait, I'll open the unit test here. Okay, so I want to describe failing with an error code. And we'll just give it a code here. Code 123. So we'll call this a context now, because this is actually in the same context. it returns a failure result. It sets the failure code, right? And this is, I mean, this shouldn't really be exposed at this point, but I just want to drive this with a test for now. So subject.call, I expect subject.failure code to equal code 123. Cool. So we've got our first unit failure, and that's easy enough to make pass. At a reader, okay. And now we want to do self.failure code equals code. And here we need an writer failure code so that we can write to that attribute and that test passes. We might want to say here its failure code is expected to be nil. We'll put this up the top here because it's a one-liner. And save. And let's just, for sanity's sake, self.failure code equals not nil. See this fail. Ooh, that didn't fail. That's because okay, I can't do this as a one-liner. I want to describe the failure code method. It is nil unless there a failure. So we want to call subject.call and expect that subject.failure code to be nil. Okay, failure. We can remove that. Success. Nice. So now we have our failure code, and we can look in on this matcher. So the matcher, there's sort of a bidirectional relationship between the service and the matcher. So once this gem does what I want it to do, then I would like to refactor it so that the relationship is unidirectional. Because right now what happens is the service has a reference to the matcher, and when you initialize the matcher, you pass on the service, and the matcher actually remembers the service as well, which isn't ideal, but I can always refactor that out later. So we could be passing through these values, I suppose, success handled, failure handled, and oh no, actually, yeah. What are we delegating to? So we just want the result and was success. We're also interested in the failure code now as well. So we could be just passing those in as data, as arguments when we initialize this class. But we'll see. So now the matcher is actually the interesting part of this project. So so failure, success, when the unsuccessful yields result when the service was not successful, it does not yield. Fair enough. Failure, when the service was successful, it does not yield. Oh, was successful, it does not yield. When the service was not successful, it does yield. Okay, now context, when called with a failure code, let was, that's actually a subcontext here, so let's say, so it wasn't successful, and we can say when called with a failure code, context, and the code does, the code matches, do, it calls the failure, it yields to the failure block with the code and no others. Right? So let's say here we've got a generic failure double. We've got a specific failure double. Probably just remove the word double. That's not really that important, is it? And we have a other specific failure. Okay. And we also want the failure code to equal specific failure code. Okay. I'm just going to reload this so I don't get the errors. Okay, so now the service is going to receive the failure code message and return the failure code. Why do I keep writing core? And the failure code for most of these things is going to be nil. Cool, green. Ah, where's the spec? All after pass. False. Reload. And save. Green. There we go. So let's write this test. So I'm going to say subject dot failure generic. I could just raise hell. Yeah, we don't really need. We'll call this side effect. So we expect side effect to receive call. That's the generic subject dot success raise more hell and subject dot failure with the code failure code, and we're going to do the side effect dot call. Cool. So that's actually what we expected. The failure code is not filtering out the generic failure. So let's have a look here. This isn't what we're interested in. We're actually interested in the matcher. Okay, so this is interesting. I don't think we need this. Let's see, will it any other thing? Okay, so we didn't need to know. So if code and code matches code. Or I suppose we just do this in line. And failure code equals code. And we can delegate failure code to the service. Okay. That's not good, is it? If not was success, that's what we want. Okay. So now our base service spec is failing. Let's have a look. Line 96. Basics. Ah, no, that's actually the acceptance spec that's failing. 96. Okay, so using the service with complex result matches. Line 96. Okay. So this is quite interesting. This has pushed our original design to its limit. It's because we can't be imperative on these calls here. We have to basically evaluate this entire block before even attempting to call these inner blocks. Because we don't know, until we get to the end of this outer block, we don't know what failures have been handled. So we're actually going to have to refactor this. But that's fine. So I'm going to go back to this and actually just comment that out and go back to the previous behavior. Oh. Result. Don't. Interesting. Okay, no, sorry, that is what we expected. Okay, so let's go back to the matcher spec. And this is now a pending test because we're not in a place to actually implement it just yet. And actually the acceptance spec at line 116 is pending. Oops, pending as well. All right, so we're now orange, and we're orange because we have reached the limit of our original design, and we now need to refactor while keeping all of our current tests green/orange. Ooh. Our video is orange as well. Okay, so basically what we need to do is store these blocks. So success block and failure blocks. Well, actually, no. We need a generic success block, a generic failure block, and specific failure blocks. So now this needs to do needs a reference to the block, and self dot generic success block equals block. And we want to def resolve yield generic success block dot call. Right. So there we go, we've got our first failure, and that's fine. Just need to update our spec. So now this becomes slightly more involved. Right, so we want to call the success, and now we want to subject.resolve, and that should pass. Nice. And now we want to go back to our base service. No, we don't. We want to go to our base service back here, and it's failing at line 75. No, it's not. Update. Oh, that's our acceptance test. Okay, so our acceptance test is failing. So that's because now we want to have self.matcher as matcher.new, yield matcher, and then self.matcher.resolve. Ooh, that wasn't good. Ah. Okay, so now we need to fix this. If generic success block dot present cool. So I'm surprised that these failures aren't. So if code.nil ing block, we want to say self dot generic failure block equals block, else, and we need to initialize our specific failure blocks as an empty hash. And now we go this is a getter specific. So this actually becomes a reader because we don't need to write it once it's been written. Oh dear. So a specific failure box is an empty hash, and now we can say specific failure blocks code equals block. Now inside resolve we do generic failure block dot call result if generic failure block dot present and not success. Right? But did not yield. This expected given block to yield with arguments but did not yield. Okay, so let's go back to that spec. Match your spec 41. So when I call failure, okay, so this is the same issue here. We need to actually manually resolve from now on. Subject.resolve. Cool. So now we've got our design back to where we needed it. Now we can unpending this and we get a meaningful error, right? So now we need to subject.resolve here, and here we go. So now to solve this issue, our resolve method needs a little bit in fact we probably need to describe the resolve method, and it runs start resolve. And let's just see that fail. Cool. So that means that like this method will run without like any special conditions, like by default. Might just put this at the top. So I know that some of these tests are probably misplaced. For instance, it's difficult to tell whether we are testing the failure method or the resolve method here. But let's just move on. This is probably, I think we're getting to the point, the sort of a limit of where we won't actually need to add a whole lot more to this. Okay, so I'm seeing this thing here, and I'm thinking that we could do this. So if not was success and I'm wondering. Okay. So raise service failure unless failure handled, right? And def failure handled is generic failure block dot present or specific failure blocks failure code dot present. Whoa. Unless was success or failure, right? Does that work? Okay. So failure equals, yeah, I think I can just raise that matcher. Failure.new, what do we need? A class and a result. Service and a result. And a result. Interesting. Matcher spec. False into the failure is called. Okay, so this is actually, we don't. This I don't think is required anymore. 73. We don't actually need this. Right. And match spec 56. Okay, so we're back to our original problem, but that's fine. So now we go back to our matcher and say, we can return failure so we can say if was success, right, we call generic success block call with result, else appropriate failure block call with result, and we can say if was success and generic success success block present, right? Cool. Oh, I shouldn't have saved that. Okay, well, if it was success and the block is present, we call it. Otherwise, we call the appropriate failure blocks. We have prevented the edge case where this doesn't exist by raising here. So now we just define the appropriate failure block, and that is specific failure blocks dot fetch failure code, and if it's not there, return generic failure block. Oh dear. What's happening here? Line 26, appropriate failure block. So this is, we could do this, or raise failure not handled. Oh, that's why. Oops. There we go. Cool. So now I can go to my acceptance test and remove that. And now all of our acceptance test passes. Okay. So let's look. Well, let's commit that first of all. I'm actually going to leave that. Okay. So added failure code behavior. Right, actually I'm going to push that up. My GitHub's not set up for this. Okay. So now let's look through the code and see if there's anywhere where we're not happy about it. Okay, so we've got 3 classes in this gem. I think this doesn't need to live there anymore. Nice. Cool. was success. I don't think we need that anymore. Nice. Success. Okay, I think that's pretty much as clean as we're going to get that. Failure, let's have a look. So failure exception. I think that's should have an optional code. Right. Okay. And then when we fail from the matcher, we can put the failure code in here, just to be nice. Success, handled success. I don't think we need those anymore. Let's have a look. Nice. You can collapse this down. Cool. Can we tidy up this conditional perhaps? Um, oh no. Okay. That can die. Ooh, what happened there? Failure handle. Oh, that can die. Okay. Generic success block, generic failure block. Do we still need result? Yeah, I think we still do. Okay, that's as tidy as I'm going to get it. Version. Let's bump version. Cool. And oops. Cool, I'm pretty happy with that. So refactored main classes, all three of them. Okay, and now let's get push origin master. Remote. Oops. Get remote. Oh, there is origin. Okay, so let's open up my GitHub. Copy that. Get remote add origin blut. Get push origin master. I need SSH keys, don't I? Because this is a new laptop. PB, was it cat .ssh id rsa.pub and pipe that into PB copy, and then no, it's that one. Paste that in. Type in my secret password. I get an email somewhere. My tablet go off. Okay, now let's push this bugger up. Nicely done, nicely done. GitHub base service. There we go. Cool. So, I gem builds base service and rubygems.org. Publish this sucker. Save. So it's been a while. Have they changed this? Contribute gems. Let me give you my free code. Mother. Why is this so difficult? Ah, sorry, I'm used to working on a just going to show you my no good. Nice. So now if we go to RubyGem and do base underscore service, we're going to see this. And we're going to see this. But that's not why. Okay, so I need to update this. Now, I had a placeholder here, so oops, gem spec. So the home page is now going to be this. Bump the version. Git add dot git date meta info and okay, git tag 0.0.3. You know what, I'm gonna bump this up to 1.0 release. That's how confident I am. Git commit dash dash amend. Right. Push origin master. Oh shit. Oh nice. It didn't. Yeah, it's already in the git ignore. So I want to git tag that. Git tag remove, is it? And then git tag. You mother. You see, I don't actually use tags that often. I think I just have to remove it. And tag it again. Git build. Gem build. Base service dot gem spec. No. No. Oh shit, that's still not working. Okay, get and commit dash amend. Okay, push origin master. Sweet. Gem build. Oops. Base. Dot gem spec. Gem push. Cool. What else should I do? I should add Travis. CI. Circle must be paying a lot for that. Um, and base service. Okay. Wow, this has changed a bit. Base service, there we go. I thought I already added a Travis.yaml. Yeah, I did. Two. 2.1.0. I'm confused. Access when you use other things. We added trends. Maybe it's just because this script wasn't in place. Normally I wouldn't be force pushing, but it's git push. How does that look? Okay. Yeah. That is running. Okay. So let's tag that. It's 1.0.0. And yeah, that was a simple gem. Let's see how quickly the test suite runs. Fast. Compared to Rails anyway. Okay, that's me um, for this evening. Hope you learnt something. Catch you guys later.